verse 25, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, mine inheritance. So I basically put a pin in those three locations, kind of picked cities within them that are prominent in the scriptures, I believe. And that's what forms the triangle. Those are the 3 points in the triangle. Specifically, Giza, I put Jerusalem there, but there's a better location that we'll talk about in a few minutes with regard to the land of Israel, and Babylon. So those are the 3 points in the Yahuwah Triangle. When I began to contemplate what is this monument that's being spoken of in Isaiah 19, I began to wonder if it was the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's the only thing that actually fits all the descriptions given, and specifically something that's in the middle and on the border of Egypt. When you realize that Egypt was divided in half, upper and lower Egypt, and right where that line is, the border of that line, it's in the middle of Egypt, where you have Giza. So at first I'm thinking, wow, I found something incredible here. And then I continue to research, and there's been hundreds of people who've come to this conclusion. I'm like, okay, cool. At least I guess I'm on the right track here. There are a lot of scholars out there who have made the connection and believe, as I now do, that that monument or whatever that thing is in the middle and border of Egypt is the Great Pyramid. I have in disc 1 of my Yahuwah Triangle disc series, which I have here, it's an hour and a half long teaching. I'm going to just give some of the quick highlights of some of it to tell you what I think is going on with the Great Pyramid. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It's the only one still remaining to this day. It's been around for a long time. Many suggest that it was built sometime around 2560 to 2540 BC, which according to my understanding places it in the pre-flood context. I was invited to speak at a secular UFO conference in New Jersey a couple years ago, and it was with the Ancient Aliens crowd, so they had like the people that are, not the guy with the hair, the Great Giorgio guy, but some of the other guys were there. And I was brought in to talk about the UFO phenomena and all that from a biblical worldview. But as part of that talk, one of the guys that was there, Dr. Robert Schock, kind of stirred up the archaeological community with his findings of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx showing water damage and showing that this place has been underwater at some point. And so, he was kind of confirming a lot of things that I was looking at about it being being a pre-flood structure. So had some really cool conversations with him and the other speakers about some of this stuff. It is the only pyramid in Egypt containing both ascending and descending passageways. All the other ones have only descending passageways. This is a cutaway showing the inside of the Great Pyramid. Fascinating study as you really get into all those things. Although it's missing today, many believe it had a capstone of gold on top, but this is what really caught my attention. This is secular Egyptologists looking at this thing. They say that it originally had 144,000 highly polished casing stones. Interesting number, wouldn't you say? Yeah. In fact, if they were highly polished, it is believed that if you could go to the moon and look back at the earth when it's reflecting sunlight, that you could have seen the reflection of the Great Pyramid shining like a star on the earth. One of the original names for it was Ikhet, I think was the name, which means glorious light. Very shiny object. Who built the Great Pyramid? Of course, the Egyptologists will tell you it's the Great Pyramid built by Khufu. If you look at the evidence for why they say that, you would laugh. Basically, in the king's chamber, let me go back a couple of slides here. If you look at this picture here, you have the king's chamber right here, and you have these relieving chambers up above it, and like the structure that they say is built that way to keep all the weight from crushing everything down below it. But these are like open areas in here. Nobody was ever meant to get in there. Nobody was ever meant to see it. The only reason we know that it's up there is because archaeologists or grave robbers did dig a passageway up alongside of it, and they found openings up here. And way up in one of these relieving chambers that was never meant to be seen by anybody was a scribbled piece of graffiti that some wonder may have been put there when they did that. No proof. Nobody can prove that it was done at the time of the construction of the Great Pyramid. This showed a cartouche, which is one of those circular hieroglyphs that represented the name of Khufu, and the graffiti that was written beside it said the gang of Khufu, or the Khufu gang. That's all the evidence we have that was built by Khufu. To me, that's kind of like the evidence that was put forward for 9/11, when we were told that 3 buildings fell at free fall speed into a pile of ash after 2 planes hit, and the jet fuel that burns only about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit melted the steel that melts at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for burning for less than an hour. And these buildings fall into a pile of ash, and they find a passport that somehow survived the fire that melted the steel. And not only was it a passport, but it was the passport of the alleged box cutter toting terrorists that supposedly slammed those planes into buildings. Yeah, it's 98% we share with chimpanzees, right? People who think they came from monkeys come up with stupid stuff like that. Alex Jones said, what was this thing made of? What were the passports made of? Shards of Thor's hammer! You know how he gets all, shards of Thor's hammer! Whatever. But that's what convinced everybody that 9/11 was done by box cutter toting terrorists, was this paper passport that somehow survived the falling of the buildings due to jet fuel. Well, this is as absurd as that is to me. This idea that something that was, when you look at all the other structures in Egypt, the pharaohs and everybody are very proud of their stuff, aren't they? Hieroglyphs all over the place. This pharaoh did this, that, and the other thing, his whole life story and military career and, conquests and blah, blah, blah. All the other temples and stuff like that have writings and things all over them. But the most magnificent structure ever built and still standing on this earth today, whatever shape it is, the earth, there's no writings, no hieroglyphs, nothing. And the only writing they did find was way up in a relieving chamber that nobody was ever meant to see? I don't think so. When I was looking to see, okay, well, if he didn't build it, who did? I was reminded of a book I read a while back by Patrick Heron called The Nephilim and the Pyramid of the Apocalypse. He didn't buy the idea that maybe the pre-flood patriarchs built it. He believed that Nephilim built it, and it was built as a structure to honor Lucifer as a counterfeit of something in heaven. And I read through his argument and eventually had to disagree with him on that, with the exception of the possibility that the physical laborers that may have laid the rocks could have been Nephilim. But I don't agree with his premise on why it was built and to whom it was to honor. And the reason I don't is because he based his premise that it was Luciferian in origin on not only the Luciferian stuff that we see, like the eye in the back of your dollar bill and the pyramid and all that stuff, but also the so-called air shafts in the Great Pyramid that point to certain stars in constellations, Draco and Sirius and some of these other ones. The stars that it points to, apparently, are stars that are typically associated with Luciferian ideas and the occult and stuff like that. That is until you read books like The Gospel and the Stars by Joseph Seiss and The Witness of the Stars by E.W. Bullinger. When you read what these two gentlemen wrote, there's an original plan that God meant for the constellations, and it tells the gospel. It tells the whole plan of God in the constellations. And E.W. Bullinger divides up the 12 constellations and all that into, it's either three, I think it's 3 books with 4, it's 3 and 4 or 4 and 3, whatever the case may be. He divides them up into books, with each book representing a number of constellations, telling the whole story from one angle. The next book of constellations telling the story, just like the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, tell the same story but from different perspectives. He say the constellations are telling them from different perspectives, but it's the whole plan of God. And now, where the Illuminati, the elite, the occultists will look at constellation like Orion and assign that to Nimrod and Osiris, the original meaning of Orion was the Redeemer, Yeshua. And so you see how the enemy basically counterfeited what the original intent was. I don't know that Patrick Heron, he has since passed away, I don't know that he ever read those books. I think if he would have read those books, he would have come to different conclusions. Because if the architect of the Great Pyramid is who I think it is, or the people that I think they were, then it's telling a whole different story. You can flip almost everything that Patrick Heron was saying and turn it around for a good story where he saw a bad story. But the idea that the stones themselves could have been laid by the Nephilim, I can buy that, because believe it or not, the Temple of Solomon was built by Nephilim. And if you don't believe me, open your Bible to 1 Kings chapter 9 and read who was conscripted to do the forced labor. It was the Amorites, the Hittites, Jebusites, all the same ites, and it even tells you these were the ones that Joshua and those guys failed to take out, they were conscripted as forced laborers. So these are the same people that are told, that the Israelites were told to utterly destroy over and over and over again, are the ones who built the Temple of Solomon. So I'm going, well, if they could be conscripted for that building, why couldn't they be conscripted for this building? You know, when you look through the synchronized biblically endorsed extra biblical text of Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees, which I've compiled into one volume called Genesis in the synchronized biblically endorsed extra biblical text, you see that Enoch was, he was shown a whole lot of things when he was taken up into heaven. And he was to write all these things down into books and to teach them to his son Methuselah. It says, according to that which appeared to me in the heavenly vision, and which I have known through the word of the holy angels, and have learnt from the heavenly tablets. I know a mystery, and have read the heavenly tablets, and have seen the holy books. He was shown a whole lot that he was to come back home, put down in writing, teach it to his son Methuselah, and these are all people who are of the house of Seth. Well, you have this text right here from Josephus in the Antiquities of the Jews. He's talking about the house of Seth. He says, they also were the inventors of that peculiar sort of wisdom which is concerned with the heavenly bodies and their order, and that their inventions might not be lost before they were sufficiently known. Upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire, and at another time by the violence and quantity of water, they made two pillars. Again, that word can be monuments or whatever. The one of brick, the other of stone. They inscribed their discoveries on them both, that in case the pillar of brick should be destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain, and exhibit those discoveries to mankind. And also informed them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. Now this remains in the land of Syria at Egypt to this day. That's the only thing that fits that description is the Great Pyramid. People who have studied it will show you that its various measurements and the various things there tell all about the earth and its place in the cosmos and things like that. Now, of course, myself and others have looked at that from the spinning heliocentric ball model, and there are a lot of very compelling things about the pyramid that would seem to indicate that. To my knowledge, nobody has decided to look at those measurements from the circular model, and I would be intrigued to find out what it would show if they did. So I'll just put it that way. When I originally did the teaching, all of my preconceived notions and findings were based on the ball, and so that's reflected in that video. But when you realize that Adam apparently had a vision of two destructions of the world, one by fire and one by water. And if the world was destroyed by fire, you know, they had the brick and they had the stone. If by water, the brick one would get washed away and the stone would remain. Well, guess which one's remaining? Why? Because the world was destroyed by water, right? So, seems to fit. And looking at the pre-flood timeline, this is a chart that I've done in my Nephilim teachings and stuff like that, showing the initial incursion of angels in Genesis 6, 3550 BC and all that. Then, you know, you have the watchers being judged, bound, and buried. We'll get to that in a later teaching. Right on the 3,000 year time period, and Enoch is raptured right just prior to 3000 BC, right around that time frame right there. So it would have been somewhere in here, probably around the same time as the Aztec calendar stone showed up, that Enoch would have come back after his judgment with the watchers and all that took place, and then instructed Methuselah, and then the house of Seth got together and built in my opinion, they were the ones that built the Great Pyramid, or were at least the overseers of the building of it. Possibly the stones were laid by Nephilim. The question is, okay, if that's true, then why was the Great Pyramid built at that specific location? Why Giza? Well, when I started to look into what various Egyptologists and other people who have looked into this thought about that location, I kept finding scholars referencing ideas that the ancient Egyptians had, that was the place from which creation began. That creation began on the Giza Plateau. This is a book Graham Hancock wrote, Heaven's Mirror Quest for the Lost Civilization. He talks about that. The creation of the world began at that location. It was known as an island. The Edfu tradition talks about that being the place creation of the earth was completed right there. So looking at the various traditions that people had regarding the Great Pyramid, specifically the people in Egypt themselves, the ancient Egyptians, I began to wonder, what if that's true? What if that is where the creation began? We see that it's one of three places important to God in the Yahuwah Triangle in Isaiah 19. So could that be, it's speculation, could that be that was the location from which Adam was pulled from the dust of the earth? Can't prove it, but there's a lot of interesting things that may point in that direction. The book of Hosea makes some interesting links with Egypt and creation, talking about Adam breaking the covenant, Hosea 6:7, and talking about the northern kingdom, being caught in their sins and whatnot. It says that they will return to Egypt. Why? Because Israel has forgotten its maker. So as I continued to do the research, I kept finding this idea of origins, creation, things starting in Egypt. Possibly the creation itself, with Adam being pulled from the dust of the earth. We know that Israel was made into a nation, not in the land of Canaan. Israel became a nation in the land of Egypt, right? God told both Joseph and Jacob that the house of Jacob would come down, 70 individuals, right? And he would make a great nation out of them in Egypt. So that's this whole idea of new things sort of starting in Egypt. Speculation, I agree, but interesting nonetheless. Could the Great Pyramid be a model for the New Jerusalem? Now, when you look at the dimensions of the New Jerusalem, most of us probably have thought of it as a cube. I know I did for the longest time. I was a cube guy. When you look at the dimensions, sure, I was thinking like the Borg ship on Star Trek, There was this big gold Borg ship kind of looking thing, big cube. But there are actually two shapes that fit the dimensions, a cube and a pyramid. And Patrick Heron was the first that I'd ever read that put forth the idea that the Great Pyramid could be a model on the earth of the New Jerusalem. He put that seed in my mind. I thought, okay, that's interesting. Doug Hamp was the one that actually pushed me over the edge on that. Some of his teachings and things that he studied out convinced me, yeah, I think the New Jerusalem is in the shape of a pyramid. If that's the case, then Patrick Heron, here's a video of his regarding his speculation on that.
In chapter 21 of the book of Revelation, John describes a future city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven to earth. John describes this future city, the New Jerusalem, in great detail. Its brilliance was like a precious jewel, and the angel measured it with a golden rod. We are told of all the various stones it's made out of. We are told it has 12 gates made out of a single pearl each, and that the river of life flows out from the midst of it, etc. And at the end of this detailed description, John gives us the dimensions of this future city, and he says its length and its breadth and its height are the same. In today's measurements, that would be 1,500 miles long, 1,500 miles high, and 1,500 miles wide. This measurement has led many scholars to believe that the New Jerusalem is a cube, but there is one other geometric model that fits the criteria, and this is a pyramid. There is no question that the Great Pyramid is a truly unique and remarkable, some would say miraculous structure, certainly worthy of being an altar and pillar to the Lord. Taking all the evidence into account, it seems clear that the Great Pyramid of Giza is an earthly representation of the future New Jerusalem, the heavenly city which is to come down out of heaven from God. So when Isaiah spoke about an altar and pillar, he was referring to the Great Pyramid of Giza. And it's this Great Pyramid of Giza which is pointing forward into the future at this future pyramid city as described in great detail in chapter 21 of the book of Revelation. And this future New Jerusalem is pointing back at the Great Pyramid of Giza. There is a direct connection between the two.
And when you consider the 144,000 stones and all that stuff in Revelation, I think there's a really good compelling case to be made that New Jerusalem would be the shape of a pyramid. And again, there are a number of other scholars who believe that as well. Of course, when I started to contemplate that, well, it looks completely ridiculous on a ball. In fact, it would wobble quite a bit. This is I plotted this out on Google Earth. This is a 1,500-mile line on the ball. It's kind of bizarre. And if it's a spinning ball, you've got big problems too. Because that's the rough scale of what you end up with on a spinning ball. I don't know. I'm just saying, it may make a lot more sense on the flat Earth